All right, so we're back here with another episode of Ship Talkers, but this time the ship is out the window. We're going down a different path here, no industry stuff. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I know it is to the gentleman sitting across from me. This is one Tristan Wimmer, and I'm going to get into this to kind of set the stage with a little context here. So Tristan has started a foundation called 22 Jumps. 22 Jumps has partnered with a really amazing company, one of which is Cohen Biosciences, and we'll get into this here in a little bit. We're going to focus on 22 Jumps here, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of how and why this started. So for a lot of you folks out there, especially in the transportation industry, this is an industry full of veterans. I know carriers that partner with us, like Averitt, is big on hiring veterans, and so are a lot of others out there. They give back to the veteran community. Tristan's here, 22 Jumps, is all about bringing awareness to not only PTSD, but TBI and veteran suicide. So this whole organization is a terrific cause. I think you have, a total of 3 events now?
3 annual events, yes.
3 annual events.
Spread out all over the country, yeah.
So this is really growing. It started right here. This is a homegrown movement that started in the backyard, Arizona, Tempe. He jumps off Camelback Mountain, which for you folks out there, that's where when all you tourists come to the valley and get stuck on the side of the mountain in the middle of summer and get lifted off, that's Camelback Mountain. So we're going to get back to the whole story behind this. But like I mentioned, one of the sad ends of what this thing supports is veteran suicide. Now, unfortunately, that's an ugly truth here in America. It's a reality we have to deal with. And anybody that's had somebody in their lives that was a veteran, it's pretty sad. It's a staggering deal. The reason it's called 22 Jumps is because every
day, an estimated 22 veterans take their own lives.
And I think this day and age, one, that's just unacceptable.
I would agree.
2, it blows me away that that's a real number, but it is. And Tristan here had a younger brother who was one of my best friends growing up. That's how I know him. And unfortunately, he was one of those statistics, but he's a lot more to both of us than just one of those numbers in that 22 figure. And that's where this really spawned. And what's really cool about this organization is it's not just raising awareness. They are making scientific strides to be able to find biomarkers in individuals to prevent this. So this is not only just awareness, it's prevention, which I think is awesome. So,
I'll kind of pick it up there. So like Bob said, I've known Bob since high school. He was one of my brother's best friends. I've known Bob since sophomore year of high school.
Yep.
Junior year of high school, something like that. He's been a good friend of mine for years. And, my younger brother was in the same grade as Bob, and we both joined the Marines. I was an infantryman and a scout sniper team leader, weapons instructor. And then I went on to become a private military contractor. Also did some volunteer. I was a volunteer SAR medic here in Arizona for Central Arizona Mountain Rescue. My brother, he joined the Marine Corps a year after me. He was a recon Marine in 1st Recon Battalion, and he was also a MARSOC Marine, that sort of Generation 1 MARSOC Marine for 1st MSOB. Both of those units are in Pendleton. It's in 2006. My brother suffered a massive traumatic brain injury in Al Anbar. It was on a combat mission, but it was actually a training incident. He was caught in the back blast of a shoulder-fired rocket. The person who had the rocket, who fired the rocket, thought it was a dummy rocket. The person who was in charge of the ordnance mixed in live rockets with dummy rockets, and then they set up the range incorrectly. Just sort of a cascade of poor decision making led to my brother having a massive traumatic brain injury, and rushed to medevac to Balad, Ramstein, Walter Reed, and then long recovery at the Burn Center in San Antonio. So yeah, it was really hard on him, really hard on the family. He seemed to be fine initially, and then obviously his quality of life began to deteriorate pretty shortly thereafter. Mood swings, a lot of volatility, quickness to anger, that kind of stuff. We just kind of, my family watched him sort of come apart over 9 years, and then he ultimately took his own life in 2015. So that's the inspiration behind the organization. So like Bob said, 22 Jumps symbolizes the estimated 22 veterans that commit suicide a day. That's based on a 2012 VA study. There's some people out there that sort of before the pandemic that took issue with that number. Some people argued it was less, but some of that preliminary data, all the not just the just the like all the lockdowns or the economic hardship associated with the pandemic. That number is actually like, they think it's, well, one, they think that number is north of 22 for two reasons: that the economic hardship through the pandemic, but also that the VA was actually underreporting the whole time. So they've sort of adjusted how they report, and that number spiked north of 22.
I can tell you right now, there's no way that it hasn't gone north of that, because it's increased in every other age group segmentation since the pandemic. So if you're going to tell me that that's one outlier that didn't, I'm going to call BS on it. And
no,
I'm with you there. So
yeah. I think it's pretty safe to say that it's north of 22 now. So that's the namesake of the organization. That's sort of that's the artifact for the phenomenon. Is 22. And so, like Bob said, we started right here in Arizona. My brother started, so I got out of the Marine Corps and started climbing. My brother got out of the Marine Corps and started parachute sports, and he looked like he was having way more fun than me. So so I followed him into skydiving, followed him into base jumping. And so when he took his own life, I wanted to use base jumping as a way to sort of honor him and raise funds. But initially it was just, I was looking for catharsis. My intention was never to start a nonprofit. But it just sort of happened that way. We had a very modest fundraising goal. No website, no social media, nothing to speak of. I think everything ran through my personal social media, and we had a very modest fundraising goal of 2,200, and we smashed it. We raised like 17 grand, did it again the next year, and then we smashed it again, raised even more. And so, after about 2 years, I realized that maybe this was like kind of lightning in the bottle. Maybe we should add some structure to this. And then it's been kind of growing like crazy ever since. And then about 6 months ago, my carrier threw their weight behind 22 Jumps as one of our biggest sponsors. So, and that's largely to the efforts of Bob here. So, yeah, very grateful for that.
No, you know what? I'm gonna give another special shout out on this one, and that's to our Chief Revenue Officer, Tommy Barnes, who got behind me. I was the one who originally brought this to him. I told him it was something that was near and dear to my heart, and probably couldn't have pulled this off without his backing. So I'm just glad that I was able to assist this year. This is neat. And for some of you that don't realize how hard this is, Tristan hikes top and bottom all the way to the top of what you can base jump off of. So everybody knows what base jumping is. You free jump off of a tall obstacle, whether that be a mountain, jumping out of a building or anything, right? They pull the chute and they land. So he's making this ascent, right? Most people just hike a mountain in a day. So not only is he hiking this 22 times in honor of people that can no longer do this in their life, we've got the 22 jumps, that infamous number that unfortunately is probably growing. But we need more organizations out there to kind of help and support this movement. Like you said, one of the things I love is, just like my carrier was a startup and it was bootstrapped from the beginning, you bootstrapped this entire organization until it became real.
Yeah, well, I did everything until I couldn't.
Yep.
If that's bootstrapping, then that's exactly what that is. I did absolutely everything until about 6 months ago. I mean, anything that wasn't social media or graphics or writing, I did everything. And I have to give a shout out to the people that came out and for event days and pack and hike and stuff. I mean, that stuff I couldn't possibly do all of that stuff. But in terms of like the work in between events, that was all me. And so it kind of got to a point about 6 months ago where it was a little bit bigger than I could sort of do on my own. And so I started to delegate and started to like form a board and form an executive team. And yeah, it's pretty crazy. We have some pretty powerful people associated with the organization, just sort of blown away by the groundswell of love and support. But yeah, it's, 82% of all the money we've ever raised has gone directly to research. It actually goes to Cohen Veterans Bioscience. It's called the Tristan Wimmer Traumatic Brain Injury Innovation Initiative. And it's a portfolio of research initiatives that are advancing testing and therapeutics for traumatic brain injuries. As of right now, if you had a traumatic brain injury, obviously if you get crushed or you have brain swelling or something, they can tell you, hey, you have brain swelling. But say that you had an injury 6 months ago or a year ago or 10 years ago, and you walked into a hospital and you said, hey, like, I have this injury, this is the mechanism of injury, these behaviors have popped up, these behaviors have gotten worse, I don't really know what's going on. They can't tell you definitively that it's because of your traumatic brain injury. You could be a career football player, and you could have some of these things pop up, and as long as the only way they can tell you definitively if what you're experiencing is a result of traumatic brain injury is if they give you an autopsy. So there's nothing for the living to tell them whether or not A, they have a traumatic brain injury, or two, if their traumatic brain injury is causing the behavioral effects or the psychological effects that they're experiencing.
Yep.
which is devastating for them. It's devastating for their families, and it's devastating for the communities.
That's the next thing I was going to say is there's definitely a ripple effect that has, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I personally had one of my friends that I grew up with riding motorcycles and dirt bikes. I'm active in that community. I race all the time, and unfortunately, that's something where people fall down a lot. In some cases, they have a TBI, and I saw that front and center where they had damage to their frontal cortex, and a lot of people, if you don't know, that's where your emotional part of your brain is stored, and they had a hard time regulating emotions. But to your point, there's nothing you can go do to test or measure that's experience through lived experience with your loved ones and noticing that change, right? And that's not a broken leg that gets better. That's something that may never get better, but could actually spiral out and get a lot worse.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot worse in some cases ends up in suicide.
Well, I mean, and you can't really put that. I mean, it's not. If you walk into a hospital and you're asking for treatment, I mean, these doctors they just literally don't have the tools to tell you that if a traumatic brain injury is a part of what you're experiencing. So they're gonna lean into the things that they know. That's psychological issues, behavioral issues. So a lot of these things that pop up, they treat the symptoms of a traumatic brain injury, but they're not addressing the traumatic brain injury themselves. And so there's a lot of stigma associated with behavioral issues, a lot of stigma associated with psychological issues. And so a lot of these guys and gals, they feel like they're being misdiagnosed, and oftentimes they are, right? They're being told they're schizophrenic, they're being told they're manic depressive, they're being told all these things, and
then they get put on medicine that can only make it worse.
Right,
my assumption.
Right. And they get put on meds, and those meds are great for some people, and I'm glad they have access to them. But like if you're misdiagnosed and you're put on these meds, it's going to screw with you. And unfortunately, that was my brother's situation. He had a mechanism of injury in his record that says, hey, like, I ate the backblast of a law rocket, and I think that's what's causing all these things. And then they basically turned around and said, well, we don't know, Yeah. But hey, you might be manic depressive, or hey, you might be this, you might be that. Here's some meds, and my brother, we just sort of, we just don't like to be medicated for as much as possible. So yeah.
Well, and to put some more context around this for you guys, like, Kieran was an extremely bright individual. I was very jealous of him growing up because this is a kid that could latch onto anything and become successful at it. So unfortunately, this is stuff where some of our service members, some of our best and brightest out there are coming back with no help, right? And that's the more frustrating thing. Not only does it suck they can't get help, but you're taking a pool of some of the best and brightest this country has to offer and not being able to help them for the services they rendered for this country. It's quite frankly bullshit. I don't know any other way to say it. But let's go into the Cohen Biosciences. Because I don't think a lot of people are aware of this. Cohen is a really, really cool outfit, and 22 Jumps is the driver of awareness behind this. I'm going to let you tell us. I don't want to steal your thunder on this, but when I found out about this and really the science behind it, not only did it make sense, but I was like, this is kind of awesome. So take me through where the Cohen Bioscience end of this is and how they're planning to maybe implement this to reduce or prevent this stuff from happening and get these guys early access to treatment from the get-go.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to speak for Cohen, but they're not here, so I'll do my best. They're a research institution. They focus solely on they're a research aggregator. So what they do is they look at historical research, that pertains to a certain issue over a certain time scale, and they look for consistencies within that research, right? And then based on consistencies within that research, that's where they funnel research dollars and manpower to try to develop testing and therapeutics based on that consistency in historical medical research. The things they focus on mostly are that biomarker testing. So they believe that they believe that certain traumatic brain injuries and certain psychological injuries, like moral injuries or PTSD, have certain biomarkers. That there actually is a chemical. There's something chemical going on in the brain which create those sort of behavioral anomalies. If somebody experiences something traumatic, whether it be physical trauma or psychological trauma, they believe that there are biomarkers in the brains in the form of neurochemicals that can indicate whether those things are present and whether that can be attributed to certain behaviors. So that's what they focus on in terms of like their testing. They test for these biomarkers, and they're really developing the efficacy behind the testing of these biomarkers. They're developing wearables, that monitor. That monitor vital signs in terms of, because one of the things they're also tracking is sort of the changes in sort of at-rest vital signs, within those who are, sort of in stasis compared to those who are sort of like managing sort of physical and emotional trauma. So they're developing wearables to sort of detect that. But one of the other things that it's a lot less sexy to talk about, that they're really hammering home, is they're trying to influence policy, specifically the policy of data sharing. So, like I said in the beginning, they're a data aggregator. One of the big stumbling blocks to actually like figuring out, and I don't want to give the impression this is like easy. It's going to take a moonshot effort to actually figure this thing. Like the brain is like one of the final frontiers of medicine, and in order to actually make real strides in that field, you're going to need sort of a moonshot effort. And what I mean by moonshot effort is you're going to have all of these like cross-functional teams with all of these disciplines sharing data, working together, creating structures that support one another. Currently, for traumatic brain injury, those things are in its infancy. I won't say they don't exist, because they're being built, but they're in their infancy, and they're one of the big drivers to change policy in terms of like how data is shared, making sure that these institutions, whether they be academic, whether they be DOD, whether they be the VA, whether they be the NIH, National Institute of Health, making sure that they're not siloing that data. And oftentimes it's not even nefarious, right? It's just like, hey, we have this cool thing. We don't know how to use it. Let's go through our protocols and our governance to set this aside so that we can retrieve it whenever we need it. When maybe when it kind of gets put on the back burner that way, it becomes non-accessible to others who may have sort of supporting research that can maybe be paired to create some sort of insight, or create some sort of testing or a product or a therapeutic or something, right? So they're really trying to attack this from a policy perspective too, which I would agree is a really effective strategy as well. So that's sort of like, that's their bread and butter. They're mostly they're taking a big data approach to the problem.
You're good.
Sorry.
Interruptions happen, folks. This is a non-industry one, so we're fine. But it brings me to a good point here. Like, you mentioned that siloing of the data. That's a total Dumb and Dumber moment, where it's like, Lloyd Christmas, you mean to tell me you had 2 gloves this whole time? Well, if I don't share that data and get that out there, these other organizations can't do that. So what Cohen's doing with these biomarkers and being able to find this early is awesome. And I get it. It's going to take a moonshot effort. But one of the things I get sick and tired of, and you hear this whenever some mass issue comes up, even if it saves just one life, it's worth it. Well, guess what? There's over 22 lives to save here. So guess what? It's more than worth it.
Yeah. I mean, what's the rate of, just for the global war on terror, right? And unfortunately, there isn't great data to track, Vietnam, Korea, and like World War II vets and earlier, right? I mean, that data doesn't even exist. Like,
back when they called it shell shock.
Right. Yeah.
There was no PTSD.
There was no, that person's just a drunk, or that person's just a wife beater. You know what I mean? Like, that person's just, unstable or whatever, right? Like, whatever they used to label it back then. But the rate of veteran suicides, just for the global war on terror, the rate of veteran suicide is something like almost 6 times higher than the rate of combat deaths during the same period. Yeah. So there's 6 times as many people committing suicide than there are dying in combat.
That should scare the crap out of people right there.
Yeah. And like I said, it sort of circles back to oftentimes they're misdiagnosed, oftentimes they're mistreated. And oftentimes, they come from communities in which, they're stigmatized for speaking about it. So they internalize it, they drink, they lean into unhealthy lifestyles, and unfortunately bad things happen.
Yep. So. And I think this is something that anybody out there listening, if you see this is something that has probably affected your life, whether you realize it or not. Just being next to it by proxy, you've seen this happen, right? And it's a crappy thing. So I think it's just awesome. A lot of people don't even know, 1 of 22 jumps, 2 of the whole Cohen Biocenter, and the fact that they're actually making progressive strides via science to actually find these things. So tell me about how this would actually work in practice, right? Let's make an assumption, because in my head, right, you get out of the military, you have your MOS, you do what you do, but when you get discharged, right, are they going to run that? Like at what place do you see this actually being implemented? Even though Cohen's an aggregator of data, and they know what's going on, how do you actually move this in practice to actually have an outcome, right? To actually see real output results? Yeah,
so it's not going to matter what. At the end of the day, I mean, the things that Cohen discovers and the thing that Cohen develops, it's going to mean absolutely nothing, and there isn't a like paradigm shift within like how traumatic brain injuries are identified, treated, identified, categorized, and treated within the DoD and the VA, right? If and those strides are being made. People wear blast sensors now that that work off PSI. If you're working with explosives, or say you're working around higher diameter ordnance, those things are there, but it's not universal, right? So you can never go to combat and receive a traumatic brain injury. I don't want to make the scene that this is like a combat specific injury. Like my brother was on a combat mission, but he sustained his injury while during a training event essentially.
Yeah.
And there are way more. I would argue, especially now that the global war on terror is quote unquote all but done. What you're seeing now is that their traumatic brain injuries are often occurring in workplace accidents, and they're often occurring in on the range that things is done incorrectly. So you need sort of a policy and like a personnel management shift within the DoD to be able to like have those develop those thresholds, sort of like, hey, if you're above a certain PSI, or if you're within this proximity, within this type of ordinance for so much time across whatever timeline, then you needed to be flagged for like a routine checkup that checks X, Y, and Z. And if a certain amount of these things are checked, then you're bucketed, for further observation, right? I'm pulling this out of my butt. Like, I don't know.
But it makes a ton of sense, right? Because
right.
it follows the same pathway we do in basically how we treat cancer, right? Early preventative maintenance and measuring allows you to actually get this notified. And the earlier you can get treatment, the better off you're going to be. At the end of the day, that's what if I had to put a bow tie on it, it's being aware of this, finding it earlier, and getting them the treatment pathways that are outside of the traditional norms that are really hard to diagnose in the current medical state that we live in.
Yeah. To circle back to your question, it doesn't matter. Mount Sinai, who actually I'm a co-lead on a congressionally mandated, congressionally directed medical research program on a Mount Sinai team at the Brain Injury Research Center, and we're tackling this specific thing. We're overhauling how the DoD sort of identifies, categorizes, and treats traumatic brain injuries. And this is a 4-year study, right? And based on those 4-year studies, we're going to produce some recommendations. And based on those recommendations, the DoD is going to cherry pick which ones work and which ones don't.
Yep.
Right? So this work is being done, but I'm just saying that to give an indication of what kind of lead time it takes for these things to be implemented, right? And unfortunately, like take my brother for example, his injury happened in 2006, right? But he really didn't his deterioration didn't accelerate until 2011, 2010. I mean, you remember.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean, like these are injuries that have long tail effects, and they don't really start to sort of accumulate and snowball on themselves to the point where they're noticeable, 4, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so, that work is being done, and I don't want to besmirch anybody who's in the space, because everybody's trying real hard. Everybody recognizes it's a problem. And I mean, there's a lot of great work being done, but unfortunately, these things do take time. And we're very excited to support Camelback Bioscience, because I do believe that their big data approach to the problem is one of those efforts that's really important to solving the problem. So
yep. Amen to that. Well, let's get back into the 22 jumps, how it's really growing. Like I mentioned, it started right here in Tempe, Arizona. I got to be fortunate to be part of the first one. I didn't have a penny to put into it other than a little bit of sweat equity and helping them carry chutes to the top, being a part of it, being a supporter there. But sometimes that means just as much as money. I'm very fortunate that now in, what are we, year 4?
We're entering into we're crossing into year 4. So this is our 3rd year around.
Okay.
So this is our 4th event.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love that it's come a long way, and that we could actually put monetary effort behind this to even push more, right? Because unfortunately, the money makes moves, right?
It does. Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I know I have a lot of connections out there, a lot of carrier partners out there that are involved in veteran-led initiatives like this. I can't tell you how cool this event is. I've personally been a part of it. You have another one in Idaho, off the bridge. Where's the third one?
Third one's in West Virginia. We did our first. So this is actually really cool. So 2 years of COVID. So the very first one was here in Arizona, January 2020.
Yep.
Like I said, very bare bones, very bootstrapped, no website, no social media. We didn't even own our own like social media.
Hey, we did have local news show up.
We did.
There you go.
It's funny. I was resistant against that because I like to be the gray man. This is not like a self-aggrandizing project for me at all. I try every chance I get to sort of like fade into the background and then kind of let someone else be the face of it. I do. It's not gonna, it doesn't always work that well, but I'm obviously I started it, so I got to be the face of it. But no, we had a couple news organizations come out, and like I said, we had a very modest fundraising goal and smashed it. That was really that was sort of the big indicator, like, oh man, we might have like a lightning in a bottle here. Let's try it again next year, right? Why, if it's that successful, why wouldn't you try it again?
Yep.
And we raised 17 grand the first year. We came back to Arizona because it was still our only event. And we raised 25 grand the next year. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I can expand the event footprint and make additional events throughout the year. So year 2 is the first year we did it in Idaho, up in Twin Falls, Idaho, off the bridge, the Prime Bridge, raised 43 grand. So it was just like the growth was like was exponential in terms of fundraising at that point. So it was pretty wild, I was just really blown away by like how much support came out, especially in Twin Falls. It's such a small town. It's like a town of like 50,000. So we weren't expecting really to raise much. We were just happy to hit our goal and to raise that much. All small businesses, all individual donations. We've actually done the math. I think, up to date, we've raised, just shy of 190,000 over 3 years. And of that, I would say 85% of it's been small donors, like mom and pop donors, which has been like, then that's heartwarming, right? And so that second year, we actually did have Bridge Day in West Virginia lined up. There were 2 years of COVID cancellation. So the next year we did, we were able to do all 3. We did Arizona here. It was kind of, the weather wasn't that great. We did Idaho, and the weather wasn't that great there either. But then we did West Virginia, and that was super cool because during the 2 years of COVID cancellations, the status changed from a national river to a national park. And for those of you who may or may not know base jumping is not legal in national parks, but it's actually written into the West Virginia Constitution that Bridge Day will always happen. So it was a sort of like weird sort of Venn diagram gray area where like, the national park didn't want it to happen, but because it was in West Virginia, like it had to happen. So base jumping was outlawed in the national parks in 1980. And so this last year's event, we were given the opening jump for Bridge Day. And so 22 Jumps did the very first base jump in a national park in 42 years, which was for the base jumping world, that's a really big deal. It was crazy. We smashed our fundraising goal. That was the event that my carrier, contributed to, which helped us push us over the top. Yeah, it's been wonderful, man. Like this year we have, we stood up a speaker series last year. It's getting a lot more mature. We're doing like a $200 plate kind of speaker series.
Well, I can't wait. I'll be there.
Speaker series dinner, man. We have like, a 20-year Army trauma surgeon who's a buddy of mine. He's also a base jumper. He's a tier 1 asset, surgery tactical team.
Yep.
For those guys, those secret squirrel types. And then we have a concert the night before at the Dixon Flannel Warehouse or Dixon Flannel Showroom. They're doing for those of you who may not know Dixon Flannels, they make these like really awesome like co-branded flannels, and they're doing a 20 Jumps co-branded flannel, and they're selling those. And yeah, it's bananas. It's growing very fast.
Well, I can't wait to get my hands on one of those flannels. I'm a big flannel lover myself. So one of the things I noticed about the whole base jumping thing is it's a kick-ass community. It truly is a community, and a lot of them are veterans, as you know, because you guys, get pushed out of planes and forced part of your basic training in a lot of cases, depending on which vertical you go in.
Right.
But tell me about how we can give back here, right? I've got everybody out here. I'm pushing this out here. I put my love, my support, my effort behind this because I care about it. It's near and dear to my heart. There's a lot of folks out there, a lot of our carrier sponsors, our partner carriers. You guys hire veterans like crazy. They're kick-ass workers. But you know what? There's a lot of them out there that you could bring into this workforce had they not have to deal with a lot of this TBI and brain injuries. How can people out there listening, like you said, it was a mom pop effort in Idaho that got it over the fence. So if we've got big corporations out here, we've got individual contributors that this is near and dear to their heart, this has somehow affected them, or maybe they just learned something new on this podcast and want to give back. Where can they learn more about 22 Jumps? Where can they go actually, give to the cause, donate on this? Go into that. Where can people continue to give support to grow this?
Yeah, I'll pull on a little bit on what you just said about, a lot of your clients, do hire veterans. And I would argue that, a lot of these blue collar jobs, I bet a lot of you have, even non-veterans working for you that have some sort of, traumatic brain injury history, whether it's themselves driving forklifts, doing manual labor. My first job, I was working demo here in Phoenix, busting up concrete, definitely had a couple of falls, had a couple of tools land on me, so it's not, traumatic brain injuries are not exclusively a veteran problem. I want to emphasize that, but by focusing on that veteran population, we can therefore help. It's sort of almost like battlefield medicine, right?
Yep.
Some of these innovations in battlefield medicine happened during World War II and especially in Vietnam. And, the lessons learned on the battlefield sort of have influenced stateside medicine, in a pre-hospital setting. That's sort of where we're at now in traumatic brain injury care. And so, there are a lot of people that are in your orbit that have traumatic brain injuries that are just that are silent about it, right? They go throughout their day, they're productive members of society, they're good family people, and, and they're dealing with these things in silence. So I just want to put that out there. But in terms of supporting 22 Jumps, 22jumps.org is our website.
Mm-hmm.
We have a goal of $22,000 for every event. And making donations is obviously how we hit that goal, which is really important. But what I want to emphasize is that we found that partner in my carrier, and we're looking for partners, outside, in sort of cross industry, sort of industry agnostic, who feel as strongly as we do that the rate of veteran suicide and suicide in general in this country is incompatible with a thriving society. Or you can't, if you're going to walk the walk, you better talk the talk, and talking the talk is taking care of your neighbors and those in your community who are suffering from these injuries. And right now we're basically in the Stone Age, working with tools and working with flint knives, trying to fix the problem. So if you feel like the rate of traumatic brain injuries and you feel like the rate of suicide in our communities is incompatible with a thriving society, then we're looking for those kinds of durable long-term partnerships, to help us grow into the future. Because we have research institution ambitions of our own, some of the social determinants of suicide, some of the things that are a little less sexy to talk about.
Yep.
Financial stress, alcoholism, that kind of things that contributes to sort of a mosaic of contributions to people who make that final decision. So if you think 22 Jumps is a worthwhile endeavor and you're interested in forming a durable partnership with us, great. If you're interested in making a one-time donation, also great. If you live in Phoenix and Idaho and West Virginia and you just want to come out and cheerlead, also great. Yep. We take support in all forms. So whatever you can give, we appreciate.
Awesome, man. We are going to get this stuff out. We'll blast it. We'll have the links to this on the feed in the video. Like I said, go check it out. Whether you want to spectate, spend, support any way you can. This is a real deal effort. This has affected me personally. I know it's affected the heck out of you, but the fact that we're taking a problem and looking for a solution, you know what? We're down the right path, and we're going to get there. So Tristan Wimmer, thanks for coming on Ship Talkers and throwing ship out the window and actually talking about something that is much more important than freight, quite frankly. And that's keeping people afoot and alive and taking care of the community we live in.
Yeah, it affects everybody. There's nobody that's not affected by this. So thanks for having me on. Thank you for being a great supporter and a great friend over the years. And thanks for having me on the podcast.
Awesome, brother. Well, we'll wrap it up. Continue to follow Ship Talkers. We'll put out a lot more episodes, obviously pretty freight centric, but appreciate it, Tristan. We're going to rock and roll on this. It's time to get out of here.
Let's do it, man.